The industry itself, the risk biz, as you can see as I call it, interestingly, a lot of the data that's really important, they don't have. But I think that's an element you bring. I think that you are definitely giving signals. You're able to identify these blind spots, trigger signals, and that data is so incredibly valuable. Comp claims are very expensive. If you could prevent 10% of these claims from happening, kind of one of these, almost like, why didn't anyone think of this before?
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Frontline Advantage. This is one of my favorite guests. Jim Lewis and I have known each other since 2019. When we did the Generator Minneapolis program together, I at ClickIt, Jim at Predictive Health Partners. We've now gone on and done other things. Jim Lewis today is the executive director at the Vaughn Institute at the University of Iowa. He and I had a chance to catch up a few weeks ago in London, England, and he saw some of the really new and exciting things coming out of Teamforce. And I wanted to bring him on to talk about that, as well as all the exciting work he's doing at the University of Iowa and in the insurance and risk space. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome, Jim.
Hey. It's great to see you again. It was serendipitous that we ran into each other, more or less. We short noticed what we connected in London, and one of the great highlights of that trip. So great to be back with you, friend, and I love what you're doing. I think it's great, very innovative, and something that the market could really use. So can't wait to talk about it.
Fantastic. Well, why don't we talk a little bit first about your background? Kudos to going back to your alma mater and being an exec director there and really helping bring more visibility to the program. For those of you who don't know, University of Iowa is a top 10 ranked program according to U.S. News for risk and insurance. So getting an endorsement from someone like Jim and getting him on the show is a big deal. Listen up. Jim, why don't you talk a little bit about your background and how you landed?
So my background is I actually was a finance major here at University of Iowa. I was planning to be a broker. Market completely tanked, so I quickly pivoted and got involved in marketing technology. Grew some agencies myself that were good size, sold them to my employees, and then tried to solve problems that I thought were interesting instead of everyone else's that I had to solve, which was fun. But I just felt like, okay, second half of my life, I think I'm going to try and solve really interesting ones. And so I went after health and medical billing and just a lack of knowledge and just like no empowerment really for consumers. We're just every other industry, we are very good typically at being a consumer, but healthcare is one of the most difficult. So I thought that sounds like the hardest thing I can do. So you know me, I'm crazy, I'll do that. And we did. We grew it. We got into medication management, prescription savings. We got price transparency, and had an opportunity to sell it to a great company called Clever Health, and they are doing fabulous and continuing to grow. And along my journey, I'd been on some of these great accelerators with you at both Generator and was part of the Global Insurance Accelerator and Expert Dojo in Southern California. Each one of them are great and fabulous for different reasons. And I saw an opportunity to kind of help out the Global Insurance Accelerator, which led me back to the University of Iowa. I was living in Scottsdale, which people question my judgment because it's so nice down there and it's very cold up here. But I'm a sucker for a really good mission, Vivek, you know this. And so I like the fact that I have an opportunity. They were looking for an executive, someone who is a business builder, connector, innovator, and could help them take this Vaughn Institute, which has been around now for 20 years, which we teach risk management insurance to the next generation. And part of what I put together is a strategic plan, which is my background. And I really was leaning heavy into innovation. I said, AI is going to be coming at us so hard. So I'm only here for 2.5 years, but it's already been very transformational. We had 50 students when I walked in. We have over 500 now. We're actually the third largest program in the world. And we're also having 92% of them had jobs before they got their diploma. And we are leaning in hard into the innovation. So that's been my background coming into this. So I'm very much a entrepreneur at heart, and I've been really leaning into the InsurTech innovation. So I would consider University of Iowa definitely a top 3 program when it comes to InsurTech innovation, and we're doing a ton of things. So I love what you're doing. I think it's fascinating. I'd love to talk more about that too.
Yeah, let's do that. So you've known us for a number of years, and our prior evolution is Click It, today Teamforce AI. We started more in the employee engagement space, moved over towards safety, really now doing operational risk, things around workers' comp and more. Talk to us a little bit about, and this is important context because you see so much. You see so many entrepreneurs, so many startups, so much innovation. You're so well connected in the space across the different ecosystems. What excites you about what you and I talked about in London just a few weeks ago?
So it's interesting, where the industry itself, the risk biz, as you can see, as I call it, we generally have lots of data, and we're not real good at using it as an industry. And I think that's where a lot of AI. But interestingly, a lot of the data that's really important, they don't have. It's one thing to have claims data. It's kind of reactive at that point. It's really hard to predict and prevent purely from claims data. And so what I really thought was interesting about what you're doing is that there's this blind spot, right, where they don't see this risk coming, or it's too late and until there's claims, and there's no data on this, before. But I think that's an element you bring. I think that you are definitely giving signals. You're able to identify these blind spots, trigger signals, and that data is so incredibly valuable. And these claims are so incredibly expensive. Work comp claims are very expensive, and a lot of them are preventable. And I think that's what you're getting to. It's the biggest. When you look at all the cost of insurance, the biggest cost, is the claim itself, the administration, and all of the support to be able to keep a promise in some cases for many, many years. But, all of that, it's like a 30% of the total cost. But that claim, that's what insurance carriers have got to be able to account for. And if you can impact something by 10%, which I think you're in that category with this kind of a product, if you could prevent 10% of these claims from happening, even if you prevented like a smaller percentage than that, but 10% is a huge number when you're looking at that upper side. When you're just trying to make something more efficient or faster, better customer experience, that's all great. It's crowded space, in my opinion. But when you get at actually predicting and preventing, that is very interesting. And you have the data from what I've seen that can do that. I think that if I were a risk manager at a self-funded large corporation, any place where I've got my risk is out around us on the floor every day, or in a factory or in a manufacturing plant, large logistics, if you could get data from that, where you could actually get your the individuals who are also stakeholders, really, they don't want to get hurt. If you could have that as your signal, empower them. I call it collaborative innovation. If you can get that is going to be the single most important piece of data that there is. And I think that's what you're sitting on, is a way to empower the individual customer to be a risk manager. And we haven't been able to do that in the past. That really, really hard to get at. There are certain InsurTech companies that are doing some of those things with wearables and some other interesting things, but this is just so obviously good and simple that it's just kind of one of these, like, almost like, why didn't anyone think of this before? So I love those kinds of ideas, don't you?
Yeah, and I mean, if you talk to my wife and the family, and they'll be like, well, it's taken you a long time to arrive at this point. But part of that pain cave is realizing that the obvious ways to solve this weren't so obvious through other mechanisms, or they were more compliance-based mechanisms, or they were checkboxing mechanisms. They weren't sort of, as you talked about, getting to those blind spots, revealing the truth, getting that directly from the workforce in a frictionless way, providing upside to the corporations by realizing that if they're self-insured, they can really benefit from a reduction in workers' comp, which, by the way, we're seeing a trend of increasing workers' comp costs, even if safety incidents aren't rising, simply due to the fact that healthcare costs are rising. And so when you think about trends, or even with AI and humanoids and autonomous, robots walking around, I mean, we're probably going to have an increase in injuries because of complexity of unknown or behavior that's unpredictable in some way. So, the medium and longer term seems somewhat interesting, but I think even in the very short term, just in the past 2 months, the reactions we've been seeing are exactly echoing what you're saying, especially coming in from CFOs who are saying, those that might not have even taken my call before are proactively picking up the moment that we're talking about, hey, we can reduce your workers' comp, and here's some proof, not theory, here's some proof of how we do this, that you're going to have a very high degree of confidence that's going to work. Because one of the things you talked about with the blind spots, there are mechanisms out there that are like, oh, we can maybe help you get some of that data. First of all, they're not getting as much data as we're talking about, or if they're using non-human based systems like cameras or whatnot, they might be capturing a lot of signals through those mechanisms, but there's still the verification component or the fixed component, the attestation that you actually have proof from the workforce that things have actually improved. And so there's just a huge opportunity that we're seeing and actually acting on that we've never been more excited for Teamforce, and to kind of have someone with your set of eyes and ears and awareness in this market. It's super valuable and helpful.
Last week I was in Chicago and I was meeting with several companies, Willis Towers Watson and Gallagher, and one of them was a gentleman at Captive Resources. And so captives, I think, would be a really interesting marketplace for something like this, because what they're all about is aligning the risk. We're all aligned that we're a group. We're now the insurance company, so to speak, if I'm in a captive. And, you want to get a lot of like-minded individuals that are all leading these companies that care. We don't want claims to happen. We don't want our employees to get hurt. We want to have safer. It's going to improve all kinds of things, and morale, but especially the bottom line. But it's also not easy to do that individually, but in captives. And this happens to be one of the largest ones, Captive Resources, and they are very interested in innovation and how do we make things, really hit that top part. It's one thing, like how can we lower the administrative costs and things like that. But there's only so much you can do on that, right? Whereas if you get really the big part, and if you can find ways to prevent, even in this case, it's really predicting and preventing, because the event hasn't necessarily happened, or maybe some smaller event that will lead to a bigger event. I think that would be a great market. I used to have a bill review company with another individual, and we were looking at these massive, work comp claims, and we were like, can we go back to the beginning? Why did this happen? And that's the thing. When you look back at the very beginning, you're like, how did we not see this? I was a blind spot. We just didn't have a way to get that data. No one was telling us this was happening. And, don't we have a suggestion box, or don't people feel comfortable? It's like, it's just not part of our routine. And what's interesting is that becomes an issue if this claim ever gets to the lawyers. They're very interested in what have you done to try to create a culture where you're preventing this from happening, or was there a way? Why didn't you do something if you knew about it? Well, we didn't know about it. So
let's talk about that for a moment, because we run into companies that, like, obviously maybe not our targets today, but some of them like to stick their heads in the sand and use this term called plausible deniability. I didn't know about it, therefore I wasn't negligent. But frankly, if you do some research on this, and you would know more than I would, but it doesn't seem that an argument actually holds up. Let me give you an example. If you go through a stop sign and you're looking at your cell phone and you hit someone, you still ran the stop sign. You're still being negligent. It doesn't matter that you were accidentally looking at your cell phone, reading some important message. You're still negligent. And OSHA, it seems, and I can't speak for them, but from what we talked to a recently retired inspector. If OSHA shows up at your facility and you go, oh, I didn't know better, OSHA's going to say, well, that's on you.
Yeah.
You're the one who's responsible for knowing these things. Now, what you're bringing up is they know and they didn't act. But what we will say to these companies is you have the choice to approve all of the content that appears on those screens. So you can focus on what you actually want to tackle first and foremost. But second of all, it seems OSHA and maybe these lawyers believe, oh, if I ask about something and don't do something about it, well, that's going to make me look bad. But from what I've been reading, I don't think that argument really holds up, does it? I mean, what have you been finding? What do you know about this?
There would be others who would know far more about this than I do. But I look at it the other way. Instead of worrying about how are we going to do in court, look at the revenue side of this. And even if you're self-funded and you've got, $1 million, stake in this, what do we do to not incur $1 million? I mean, as opposed to worried about a one in a very small percentage of something being used against you in court. I mean, this is right here, right now. I mean, why aren't we focusing more on that? Give you an example. There's another insurtech company I was speaking to yesterday that they're using AI and security cameras. All right. And there's 90 million of these cameras all over America. And what percentage of those are smart, able to do anything? Less than 1%. There's like this big placebo out there, right? And even if you were people watching this, it's like, that would not be a fun job, first of all. And you got to believe that AI could do it better than human, and it does. And what they've been able to do is use the cameras to identify slip and falls. Kind of similar to what you're doing. And this company's called Intellicy. I think they're really interesting. And what they're able to do is use existing cameras, take that feed, it's a different set of data that they're getting than what you're doing. But I can tell you the carriers are interested. We have carriers that are offering a discount for using their product. There's large brokers that are like, ooh, interesting. This is a common sense. It just makes sense to be able to predict and prevent. Similar to what
and we can use the same analogy there. You see it on the camera, but you don't actually act on it. Right. Doesn't that create the same issue that you just described?
I think it's very similar. Very similar. And I think that, you could say, well, our cameras weren't working, so there's nothing we could do about it. But wow, wouldn't it have been nice to turn that on and prevent it from happening in the first place? And yeah. I think another thing that's interesting about this is I call it cross-industry innovation. So I know you kind of started even not necessarily in insurance. It was really more of, how do I improve engagement and things of that nature. And it's like sometimes there's this tool that's sitting there and you're like, I'm trying to make it fit in this industry. And we're like, well, this fits great. One of my good friends, Jack Kudale from Cowbell, he was in cybersecurity. And he said, why don't we create adaptive cybersecurity insurance? I mean, that, prevent it from happening and make sure it's the up-to-date and everything else. And Cowbell's doing fabulous. That's a cross-industry innovation. I think the Intellicy is another example. They actually were trying to stop school shootings. And they're like, well, such a small percentage of the time that happens, can we really afford to do it? And then you're like, wait a second, we can use the same data for insurance. It's kind of what's happening, I think, with you too, is that you've evolved nicely using cross-industry innovation that, perfect timing for this. And, it doesn't take a lot of equipment, a lot of costs. It's really just kind of it just seems it's such a logical thing to do to improve the safety and your bottom line at the same time.
Yeah, it's the lateral thinking. I think having gone through the exposure we did, we were able to arrive at these insights that otherwise might have seemed challenging, or people might have considered different ways, as we talked about. The AI camera market's interesting. We have a partnership with eMagic Eyes by Rain Scales, which does what you described. It takes the cameras you have and you run it through their AI system. And we've posted a few videos about that. I think there's some other players in the space as well. And, I like your points on what we realized is like, you go from, say, the HR department, which might really want to do well, but has arguably one of the smallest budgets in many organizations, doesn't have maybe the power would like to have to execute on things. And for us going to the operations side, but even going one level up more recently and to kind of the CFO and board level, because you're going now not from a safety budget or an OpEx budget, you could say, which still feels like an expense, to when you then present to the CFO, you're presenting actual profit through an initiative that benefits the ops side, that benefits the HR side, that benefits maintenance, quality, all these other departments, but is now not being seen as, oh, it's another line item costing us money. This is actually a net benefit to our P&L. And the way I like to think about it is people often say, even in the past with our system, Vivek, I love this, or it's really interesting, it's really cool when we were doing the HR employee engagement stuff. But when you think about when we're talking about the workers' comp angle, it's no brainer. Yeah. How could I not be doing this? In fact, my workers' comp costs are rising even when I'm not seeing elevated safety incidents. And although many of them are seeing elevated safety, I've got to do something. And it's now not just becoming a clear ROI case, which is what we provide and is always, what you have to prove a value at scale. It's becoming a top 3 priority for a lot of these execs on the finance side, which wasn't, you talked about perfect timing. I don't know if that was the case years ago, but it's definitely more of the case now. Yeah. And that's exciting. That's when actually I want to affect this. Or when you think of P&L, in a lot of these industrial environments, these are tight margin businesses, or even in healthcare. And so you can either increase revenue or you can decrease cost. Well, increasing revenue when you're a low margin business is pretty darn hard outside of big tech. I mean, it's really hard to grow quickly. Yeah. And so how do we actually do things on the cost side? Well, workers' comp is becoming that lever that historically maybe didn't get as much attention as it is now. But like you mentioned, it's not just even a 10% reduction out of the core component of that, or the retained losses if you're self-insured, that's a big deal when you're talking, a couple million, tens of millions. That's real money that we're seeing at a minimum.
This is a category that I think is very elusive. You're trying to prove a negative didn't happen, right? That's hard, because you're like, well, is it because of us that we didn't have this happen? This is where I think you're different, though, is that you have data. I mean, that data alone could correlate very nicely with incidences and say, we had no reports and we had an incident. Well, that was surprising. If we had a lot of reports and we had an incident, it's like, should have seen that one coming. We had the blind spot data, had the signals, we got to do better next time. But like having that data and being able to say, ooh, that puts us in a much higher risk category. Do a risk score. It's kind of like, well, that's almost like having the answers to the test. Here I'm at a university. I mean, that to me, that's like, ooh, I like that one. I like having those signals that wouldn't be that hard to create a return on investment formula that could be pretty predictive.
You've hit the nail on the head. So you could think even in the mid part of the evolution, even say last year it was selling safety in the OpEx budget. We're selling EBITDA protection.
Oh yeah.
If you're self-insured and you have retained losses and you're trying to prove direct attribution of a system, well, if you're selling employee engagement, what's a direct attribution? It's really, really darn hard. Yeah. And it takes a long time. And even in the current environment, the question around retention is maybe not as much of a priority as before. But if you're saying, here's my balance sheet, here's my income statement, I have my retained losses, and my retained losses for workers' comp is due to claims. It's very factual. It is due to actual factual claims, usually above first aid and below something really, really severe, say like a death. There's a big chunk in the middle that companies are assuming often this risk directly. Now, if you're saying, how do I prove attribution? Well, you have a before number. And if you're self-insured, you don't need to wait 3 years for your XMOD or your EMR to improve, which, if you're not self-insured, would still be beneficial for you to have this. But if you're self-insured, that stuff is going to start moving ASAP, immediately, within 12 months.
I don't think that's going to be hard to prove out, really. I mean, I think of students I have here, undergraduate students, could prove this model out pretty quickly. Just with the data points that you're getting and what's being reported, that's strong correlation. I don't think that would be that hard to prove out. The other thing I was thinking as you're describing this is I go back to captives. I like captives from a standpoint that you get into some of these medium to growing businesses. They're not quite ready to self-insure on their own, but collectively that's what they're doing, right? And they tend to be a little bit more innovative, looking for solutions. And I think the brokers that are dealing with the larger, the medium to larger, they definitely are looking for ways to come in with solutions. That risk manager at that company or the CFO, they might go, I don't know. But if you have just a few advisors that can point to look, this is an innovator, early adopter, yes. But, if you wait 3 years, you're going to miss out on a significant amount of savings, and we can prove it out. This sounds like one of these, I need it, I just don't know that I want it, right? Because I don't understand it. I need it though. I need something to protect me on this. So, I think you're going to have a pretty quick turn where people are going to start realizing that, okay, this is a relatively low risk, high impact, and not much downside,
Yeah. I mean, you talked about readiness, and I think that it just depends on organizational readiness, the culture. Are they ready to act on this kind of thing? And not every company is today, but that's okay. What we need to focus on are the companies who are. And if you are, please reach out to us because this is going to become mainstream.
Yeah.
And so,
I'm going to, just go out on a limb here a little bit, but we love InsurTech innovation companies. We've had a number of them that we work with at the University of Iowa. We have them speak at our classes. We do projects for them. I teach a class on InsurTech innovation. And I think this would be a really interesting project for my students. They love innovation. So we'll figure out after this call how we're going to make that happen. But I think that I know a lot of companies that would be very interested in knowing, how does this work and why would we not try it?
Absolutely. And for those of you listening, and you've got to know, Jim Lewis has been instrumental to me. Over the years, he connected us to angel investors. One of them actually being a key one that invested. He's mentioned different accelerator programs to us. He has come up with just ideas like you're hearing now, but also brokers. He really sees a ton of opportunity. And I think the thing I really want to call out about Jim that's different from so many others is a lot of people would look at what we have today and probably see it and realize, okay, this is exciting. But there are a number of people over the years who would have looked at what we had and not been excited, and justifiably for what the business was at that point in time. But what they failed to see that Jim saw is that these early stage companies are run by people who, if you believe in someone, that they can be determined to figure it out and to keep trying. That's what allowed us to get to this point. And that's what I cherish the most about you, Jim, is that you believed in me when I didn't have it then. And you believed that I would figure it out. And you never made me feel small or lesser or that I was incompetent in some way. And having gone through those pain caves to arrive at where we are, and all of a sudden, people are excited to want to spend time with you and talk with you and see opportunity in what you're doing. I don't forget the people who were there for me in the early part of that journey. So I really want to thank you for believing in me when it wasn't what it was today, and that's incredibly rare in the world.
Vivek, there were only 5 of us that made it out of 600 applicants, or some crazy number. I'm glad they didn't tell us how many were applying when we tried. We'd have been like, why would I do this? But we made it, and honestly, you were certainly, in my vote, the most talented of the group, and it was a pretty impressive group. So I know that when you have a really worthy mission, you will find a way. There's no doubt about it. And I think you've done a great job of, adjusting, not even quite pivoting, but definitely, finding where is the path of least resistance. And I think you're on it. I think I think this is a winner that you've been working on for a while. And, a lot of companies, it took a while to figure things out. They don't just happen. Some people, they're very fortunate, and they had it and they're just lunch and here they go. And you're like, but some of them take a while and then finally you're like, okay, this is it. I think you're there. So happy to help you. And we'll talk after this about getting you into our classroom and letting our students help out. Because I think this is the kind of thing that frankly inspires and equips the next generation. They're not here at the University of Iowa to just go get a job. There's such a demand. We have 400,000 jobs are retiring at the end of this year and don't have really enough people at all to fill those. So we better lean into AI and technology or we're going to be in a world of hurt. But this generation, they don't want to just go get a job. They want to go make the world safer, smarter, more secure. They want to have a purpose, make a meaningful impact. And I do too. That's why I'm here. I don't think we just need more insurance execs and people out there. I mean, that's nothing against insurance execs, but I'm just saying let's solve important problems. Let's make the world safer. Let's fix some of the customer experience things that are just ridiculously broken. And let's get an example, one right here.
Well, Jim, I want to thank you so much for coming on. This has been a blast. It's felt like such a genuine conversation, like you and I just catching up. And it's wonderful. So thank you, Jim, for coming on Frontline Advantage.
My honor. We'll just go get them. Good luck, bud.